Hello, this is Mr. Snarf or John, and this is Lima Bean Tea, and I've got a good story for you. And this is a very popular story. People always seem to like this. Kids of all ages seem to like this story. And want to tell you that I'm working on these stories and the audio and getting it all to sound good. So if this one doesn't sound great, maybe by the time I do the next one, it will. So here's the story. When I was a boy, about 8 or 9, I grew up in southern Ohio in a relatively small house with 7 brothers and sisters and my mom and dad and a couple of cats. And one of our favorite things to do in the summer was eat dinner outside. It wasn't such a big deal, but it was really fun. And we had a small picnic table on the side of our house, and we would take all the food out there. My mother would announce about, I don't know, about 5:30 or so that we were going to eat outside. And we would put a nice tablecloth on the picnic table. And it was a picnic table that probably 6 people could eat at, but we shoved 10 of us at it. And so one day in the summer, probably about June, my mother announced, "We're eating outside." And we were so excited. So she got all the food ready, and she was such a good cook, and we all went outside, set the table nicely, and we sat down and started eating, and we're just having a good time. And my brother, older brother Mark, who was kind of a comedian sometimes, he was maybe 12. He was making faces at my sister Marianne, who was about 1.5 or 1, I guess 1.5. And she couldn't talk. She was so little. Maybe she was even younger, but she was sitting in a little booster seat on the picnic table, and my mother was saying that she had just washed my little sister's hair, and she had very thick, kind of wavy black hair, and she looked very pretty, and very rosy cheeks and freckled, very pretty. And so my brother was like making faces, and he would say, "Marianne, do this," and stick his tongue out, and then she would stick her tongue out. We'd all laugh, and it was just fun. And he'd say, "Marianne, do this," and he would sort of wave with one hand, and then she would wave, and we'd all laugh. And it was fun. So then my brother had a big plate of food in front of him, and he noticed that Marianne, my little 1.5-year-old sister, had a big plate of mashed potatoes in front of her. So he slid his plate aside and pushed his hands down on the table and said, "Marianne, do this." And of course, she put her hands right in the mashed potatoes. So my mother said, "Don't do that. I just gave her a bath, and you're going to make a mess, and stop doing that." Of course, we're all laughing. We thought it was really funny, and Marianne was laughing. So my mother went, wiped her hands off, and told my brother, "Don't do that again." So a few minutes later, my brother was looking around, kind of mischievously, and so he said, "Marianne, do this," and he did the same thing again. And as he put his hands on the table, she had this plate of mashed potatoes. She gets mashed potatoes in her hands. Then he says, "Marianne, do this," and he rubs his hands all over his hair. He had a buzz haircut, so it was real short, and she rubs mashed potatoes all in her hair. And we all just laughed, and she laughed, but my mother did not laugh. She was unhappy because my sister with her thick curly black hair had mashed potatoes all in her hair, and my mother just washed her hair, and my mother's watching and taking care of 8 of us, and now the baby has a head full of mashed potatoes. So she laughed and said, "Oh, that's really funny. Haha." She said, "Just wait till you get up from this table," and pointed to my brother. And he said, "What are you going to do?" And she said, "Well, you'll see." So I was kind of worried, and I'm thinking, well, she's going to give my brother a spanking. So I said, "Mom, are you going to spank Mark?" And she had this very evil laugh and said, "No, no, I'm not going to spank him." So I said to my brother Mark, I said, "Maybe you can sneak away, or maybe you could run or something." And he said, "No, no, no, don't worry about it." So we're eating dinner, and then as people got up from the table, we moved down so he could be on the end of the bench that was attached to the picnic table so he could get away. And I was at the end, but I switched places with him. I said, "Mark, now you're at the end, so when mom's not looking, you should run. And he said, don't worry about it. And I said, Mom, what are you going to do? And she said, oh, don't worry. You'll see. So I was really thinking I have to protect my brother Mark from whatever my mom's going to do. And she was not afraid of anything. And she was a wonderful woman and very beautiful and a good cook, but she wasn't afraid of us. She wasn't afraid of a 12-year-old boy. She wasn't afraid of anything. And she could be wonderful and gracious and beautiful 1 minute and be pretty mean the next if necessary. So anyhow, um, she still had this evil laugh going, and she did not give my brother a chance to get away. And I think she turned the baby Marianne over to one of my sisters, who took her in the house to wash her hair again. So I'm thinking I really got to protect my brother. But I heard a baseball game, getting started in the other end of the house on the other side yard, and decided that I gave up on him. I said, Mark, you're on your own. I'm going to go play baseball. So I went over there, and our yard was real popular for baseball because there were 8 of us, 8 kids, and we had pretty much a baseball team, just us. So kids would come over, and one person bring a ball, one person bring a bat, and we had wiffle ball, if you know, plastic ball. And we would really sock that thing and have a good time. So the game's forming up, and I'm having a good time, and we're setting out the bases and figuring out who's going to be on what team and everything. And I forgot about my brother. I figured, I don't know what's going to happen. So about 10 minutes goes by, and I've forgotten about the whole thing. But all of a sudden, I hear my brother just yelling really loud, and he's just tearing down the backyard toward the side yard, and he's making a lot of noise. And my mom is 5 steps behind him, and she yells to him, if you make it to the curb, I'll let you go. And she had in her hand, cocked back like a weapon, a big bowl of mashed potatoes. And my brother is running as fast as he can. He's 12. And I just figured out the other day my mother was about 40 and a housewife, a mom. So my mom is about 40. So she's, as I said, flying down the yard, and my brother's yelling like, ah. And just before he makes it to the street, she perfectly smashes this bowl of mashed potatoes onto the top of his head. Didn't hurt him, did it very carefully, but the mashed potatoes just smashed in his head and poured down, in globs around his head and on his shirt and onto the street. And she was laughing and he was laughing, and we're freaking out, and it was just hilarious. So she said to him, I showed you, and she took the bowl and went back in the house. And the kids were just shocked, and they started laughing, and my brother's scooping these potatoes off his head. And of course, he was 11 or 12. He didn't want to go into the house and take a bath or anything. So we said, come on, Mark, play baseball. And he scooped the potatoes off his head. And then he was sort of swatting at his head, and I noticed that there were insects, getting on his head, mosquitoes and flies and things. And he sort of scooped the potatoes off so that he had, hair about a 1/4 inch thick, and then it was just smooth like a helmet of potatoes. Then he went in the house and got a metal pan and put it over his head like a helmet. Eventually we went over and we had to spray the garden hose on his head like he was a dog or something. And, he had to take a bath that night. So that's a story about the mashed potatoes. And, that was pretty funny.